Hiya there. I'm going to be doing another history movie review this evening, and this one is going to be on one of my favourite films. I really do like long movies, especially historical movies, but this is one of my favourite ones. So this is going to be Kingdom of Heaven. It's a 2005 film, directed by Ridley Scott, brilliant director, and it stars quite a few big hitters as well. So you've got Orlando Bloom, fresh off his Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the Caribbean fame in the early to mid 2000s. You've got Jeremy Irons, you've got Brendan Gleeson, and you've got Liam Neeson. So, and there's a raft of other well-known actors in this film. You know, notably there's a little cameo from Edward Norton as well. So, yeah, it's a brilliant movie, and I'll go into this. But first, if you wouldn't mind liking the video, if you want to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, I'd much appreciate it. And if you can drop me a comment to let me know what you thought of the movie as well, and any recommendations, similar movies or any movies you'd like to see me review, I'll check that out, no problem at all. But first of all, I'll go into the summary of the movie. So this movie is a movie set in the Crusading era, so the Second Crusade in particular. So the main character is by the name of Balian of Ibelin, who was a real person in history, although differently depicted than Orlando Bloom's character in this. But just to give an overview of the plot, so you've got this Balian is, I think he's in the sort of the Western France, or definitely sort of middle Europe area, and he, whilst he's working as a blacksmith, he comes across a knight, and a crusading knight who's come back from the Near East, or as it was known at the time, Outre-mer, which means over the sea, French word. So they've come back from the Holy Land. By this time, the First Crusade had been successful. The Christian West had gone east. They had conquered land from the Fatimid civilization, which was a Muslim-based civilization. The Fatimids, they held and the Seljuk Turks. So you're talking the today's Turkish people who would recently, within the last few decades and hundred years or so, had converted to Islam, and they were controlling pretty much the northern area of what we would now call Lebanon, southern Turkey, upper Iraq, and upper Syria. And then the Fatimids, then another civilization below them, came out of Egypt, and they were controlling Egypt upwards through Palestine, including Jerusalem there, and areas such as Damascus as well then. But that changed hands quite regularly as well. And a lot of these big cities themselves were independent, or they were, you know, entities themselves, like Baghdad, Damascus, and so forth. Anyways, so these group of crusading Christian knights come back to where Balian of Ibelin is working as a blacksmith, and just so happens that one of the crusading knights is the father of Balian, which is the Liam Neeson character, and he entices his son to come on crusade with him to the Holy Land, and he does so. What I liked about the film was that it takes you the journey from lowly sort of blacksmith, village person in the middle of Central Europe, all the way through the forests of Germany, down through the Italian peninsula, where they go to Messina, the port of Messina, in order to where they are gathering the boats of the Second Crusade, ready to go into the Holy Land, push further into the Holy Land. Now, what's very interesting about that small, I think 10-minute, or if that, segment of the movie, is that it does represent the sort of the journey, but that ordinary people back in those times that took to go to the Holy Land. And there are famous names from the Crusading era, such as Richard the Lionheart, Saladin, Zengi, Baibars as well. You've got Louis the Ninth, you've got Conrad of Germany, you've got Bohemond, all the Baldwin kings of Kingdom of Jerusalem as well. But it was the average people where I found quite interesting, and we don't often hear an awful lot about the sort of the pilgrimage and the journey itself. Because this was, I don't think people fully understand. This was an absolutely huge undertaking. You were having thousands upon thousands of people from Europe. Animals, beasts of burden. Food, weaponry. Money, everything, possessions. They were being transported west to east. They were really trying to set up really take over the Holy Land for the permanently, and make sure that stayed in Christians' hands. I'm not going to go over the deep reasons for the Crusades themselves. Safe to say that, personally, I think that after you read Dan Jones's Crusaders books and Thomas Asbridge as well, and also there's a brilliant book which is called The Crusade Through Arab Eyes as well. The Crusades, as far as we are concerned, in the 21st century, looking from my point of view, were nothing more than an opportunity to consolidate papal power at the time, and to use that power to enforce a geopolitical change. You had effectively a really culturally rich civilization under the banner of Islam, who had taken over since the 7th century under Muhammad, and they had conquered the Middle East all the way up until what you would consider today modern day Turkey, as far west as the North Africa, and even as much as Spain and half of the Spanish Peninsula as well. So effectively the church at the time, over centuries, they had been on the back foot. They had been defeat after defeat after defeat. They really wanted to turn the tide. Just so happens that it coincided about the time of one of probably the most important and culturally rich and developments, which was the Islamic world at the time. And certainly in Western Europe, we don't give enough credit to the scholars, particularly people in Baghdad and Damascus, for the cutting edge science, cutting edge mathematics, cutting edge philosophy that was done at the time. Islam really was in a Renaissance type of period, at the peak of its particularly in the Middle Ages, very much at the peak of what you would consider to be the world's civilizations at the time. And really looking at it from a sort of a Middle Eastern Islamic perspective, you had these sort of unskilled, culturally sort of backward barbarians that were coming from the west into the east, effectively to take over land, to take over what they seemed, which was their holy city, despite the fact that at the time Jerusalem, in fairness, under the Fatimids, was one of the more sort of lenient times. There wasn't an awful lot of persecution against any of the groups. Particularly Jerusalem is home to multiple faiths, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and it had been known under Islamic rule. You do get instances where I think it was called the tax, where the people paid who were Jews and were Christians, they would pay to the people who controlled Jerusalem at the time, who were Muslims. But there was no difference in rights whatsoever, as far as I'm understood. No difference in rights whatsoever. They did pay a tax to be in the city, but they were people of the book. They were people who were, and there's what people, I've got quite an overlap There's quite an overlap in between all three faiths as well, which is obviously, what people don't like to talk about, particularly in the modern day era. Those who are not seeking to divide people will very, very rarely talk about how there's more similarities than there probably are differences, particularly within the people of that region and what the beliefs are. But anyways, back to the movie. So you've got that. You've got the passage of the ordinary people from Eastern Europe into the Middle East, and whilst you've got that, then you're starting to be introduced to a couple of the main characters who are going to be influential in the plot. Namely, you've got one of them, which is a knight by the name of Renaud Chatillon and Guy of Lusignan. So one of the particular characters, Guy of Lusignan, was a knight from a family from Poitou, which is in western France, and this man was being pretty much going east, and he would be effectively crowned king of Jerusalem by marrying the princess, which was Sister Sibylla, whose brother at the time was on the throne. His name is Baldwin, and he is a descendant from the original kings of Jerusalem, of the original conquerors of the city, the Christian kings, and unfortunately, Baldwin is this king is, although he understands the Muslims, he is not as fanatical as a lot of the other Christians, the pilgrims who are there, the other sort of military orders, which we get introduced to. Baldwin is a leper, so unfortunately is afflicted by a skin disease. It is alluded to in Dan Jones's Crusaders book and in this film that it is genetic as well. Unfortunately, he wears a mask over his face, a full-plated mask, probably just to obscure the marks on his face. And that's Edward Norton behind the mask, who plays him pretty well, I would say, as well. And it does come across that he has a respect for Saladin or Salahuddin, who is the leader of Salahuddin is the man who effectively united the Arab world after the initial shock of the First Crusade. There was a lot of to and fro and a lot of sort of fragmentation but in the Islamic world afterwards, but he takes over he builds upon the success of another military leader by the name of Zengi, and Salahuddin then galvanizes the Islamic world, and later on you see him pushing for the reconquest of the lands lost to the Christians. But he is a fantastic military general. Contrary to some information, he did lose battles, did lose minor engagements, but for the most part was a really successful general, and a really level-headed person as well. At that, really a modest, a modest warlord, you could put it across as. I mean, when you compare him to some of the Christians that came eastward. But as far as the Muslims were concerned as well, these people were coming eastward were effectively fundamentalists, and the irony today that we have of Islamic fundamentalists in the West. This is a yo-yo effect that has reverberated since the Crusades. So at this point, just to describe it as it relates to the plot, you see Balian takes over from the Liam Neeson character, who dies unfortunately because of a wound sustained in the film. He inherits the land in which his father had in the Middle East, and at this point now starts to become really part of the sort of the military circle of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So there were different kingdoms in the Outremer, as they say, so the over the sea, so the kingdoms over the sea. You had the county of Edessa, the county of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And the Kingdom of Jerusalem is effectively where all four had some sort of autonomy, and different rulers and different landowners, but the Kingdom of Jerusalem effectively was the heartbeat of the Crusader states at that time. So you see the Orlando Bloom character being introduced to a sympathetic character, a knight played by David Thewlis, who is a knight of the hospital. So this is a military order that was set up at the time. They are called the Hospitallers. This is where we derive our word today of the hospital and the care for injured people, injured soldiers. You have the Jeremy Irons character and others in the film who are alluded to as Knights Templars. So the Templar Order were originally set up as protectors of pilgrims coming from Europe to the Middle East, and also they were there to then protect people, safe passage of the trade caravans coming from west to east and east to west as well, from banditry and so forth as well then. But as history would show, that later on the Knights Templar began to have a massive impact not only on the Middle East but on the rest of the Christian world in particular. They became the de facto bankers, bankrollers and money changers in the Christian world until they were effectively destroyed in the 1300s. Well, this is where we get our Friday the 13th from, where they were burned at the stake on the Friday the 13th in Paris, which was the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake and was accused of being a heretic after a lot of banana republic, sort of kangaroo court chicanery by the French king and his pope, his puppet pope as well, that they really wanted to sort of get at the power centres of the fact that and the money that the Templars were able to access, and they were keeping all across Europe. But anyways, these are parts of the film that the Balian character is being shown. We are shown in the film that the Crusader states, even after invading and establishing themselves, are absolutely riddled with infighting, fighting between themselves, fighting over minor things, over land, over titles, over who gets to be king, different factions within them, the military orders. You've got an undercurrent then of Christian fanaticism as well, where people after the successful First Crusade, they think, why don't we kick on? Why are we settling? We should conquer the entirety of the Middle East. We need to go to Damascus. We need to go all the way to Cairo. So there's a lot of moving parts within the Christian sort of Crusader states at the time. What I did like, and the best characters in the film would be the actor who played Saladin was absolutely superb. He brought across in the display the ferocity, the determination, but also the grace of the man as well. The genuine respect that he had for the King of Jerusalem, Baldwin. Baldwin, unfortunately, was not long for the earth. Who was going to die during the film and in real life, and really the hopes of maintaining any sort of peaceful coexistence really went with him, because the inheritor, which was Guy of Lusignan, the character who we were introduced to, who pissed off the Orlando Bloom character earlier on in the movie, he becomes King of Jerusalem. Who would have thought it? But he does, and he is definitely in the sort of the war hawk camp of, F them. Let's go and let's raid all these trade caravans. Let's kill as many Muslims as we can. Let's fleece all the other people in the city, the Muslims, the Jews, even their own Christians, Eastern Christians from the Byzantine Empire, or the Orthodox Church, which is there at the time as well. So really, a really sort of foul sort of character in the film as a leader in real life. Maybe he didn't do everything he does in the movie, but the sort of fanaticism is played upon in the movie anyways. What I liked about this as well is the actual representation of Jerusalem, the city as well. Jerusalem at the time had roughly a population around, say, 30 to 50,000. even after the First Crusade, where there was a significant amount of bloodshedding and butchery and savagery by the Christian invaders in Jerusalem. And I don't think that was, even now, it's a black mark, certainly on the history of the world within that city. But how the city looks on screen, the interplay between all three, the what you got to understand as well is that even after the First Crusade was successful, a lot of people actually then went home back westwards to the principalities to rule their kingdoms in Western Europe. So effectively you have a class of people, a military orders and aristocrats from Western Europe ruling all this land in the Middle East, and you've probably not even got around, say, 1,000 to 2,000 knights ruling all of it. Hence why there's a constant flow and request from the Pope and from home back west, send more people, send more skilled people. We need this, we need that, we need these fighters, we need these provisions. Really, they had set sort of like a bit of an extended base camp over in the Middle East, but that the representation of Jerusalem as a high-walled city with different sort of, not ghettos as such, but different areas aligned to the faiths, the interaction between the faiths as well. It was a centre, pretty much. It was. I suppose it is even now. Even with map making, Jerusalem was the centre of the world, and it is shown as that in the movie as well, which I thought was fantastic. The huge walls, which really were to deter any attacker from Jerusalem. I mean, eventually they were to be razed to the ground. Later on, I believe it was by the Mongol invaders, because the Mongols actually invaded which was another trump card later on, invaded the Middle East as well, whilst the Crusaders were still there, albeit hanging on by a thread with the up in the northern area where today we have Lebanon and southern Turkey. They'd lost Jerusalem a mile after that. But anyways, what I liked about the movie and the authenticities that I'm really looking for is the Battle of Hattin. So you have in the film an overwhelming sort of shift in momentum towards the Muslims. They have been consolidated. They are unified under an inspirational and effective, brilliant military commander, which is Saladin, and the inevitability of the retaking of Jerusalem starts to sort of dawn as the infighting increases and as the war hawks within the sort of military orders and the kingdom of Jerusalem are sort of, blinkered, totally blinkered by the fact that we've taken this, we are the superior warriors, we're gonna thump you, and they get absolutely trounced at the Battle of Hattin by Saladin's forces. And one of the things I liked about the aftermath of that is that captured would be Raynor Chatillon and Guy of Lusignan. So the two really sort of war hawkish people had been captured and thoroughly beaten by Saladin. And when he's in Saladin's tent, he gives him a cup of rose water to Guy of Lusignan. And what I liked about that was that at the time there was a mark of respect to your captives, particularly with the Muslims, that if you were captured by a captain on the field, that if you were given gifts or if you were given anything to sustain yourself, it was effectively a nod to say you are not going to be executed, you're not going to be enslaved, or you may be sold back to where you may be ransomed. But it was a mark of respect, particularly from one captain and one general to another, albeit Guy of Lusignan was a bit of a prick in the movie. Because he was the king of Jerusalem, that respect, unfortunately for Saladin, was probably, with his military code, was automatic. However, with Reino of Chatillon, who is the most war hawkish person of the entire military orders in the Christian kingdom, in the kingdom of Jerusalem. He takes the drink. It wasn't meant for him. Now, there's conflicting information about what really happened. Some say that the Mamelukes and I think it's the Mamelukes and Saladin, or Saladin's bodyguards, were the ones to execute Reino of Chatillon. Others say it was Saladin himself who actually stuck a blade and struck Reino of Chatillon before beheading him, and that was his punishment for raiding the trade caravans. Particularly in this movie, that was his punishment for, bringing war upon people who didn't bring him war. The war was to be on the battlefield between warriors, not to be, infringing upon the sort of chivalry at the time and, raiding Islamic trade caravans, which were just, low-hanging fruit and easy pickings, really. But anyways, I really like that authenticity. I mean, there's a lot of the film which is not true. Obviously the sort of Liam Neeson character, Balian of Ibelin. I mean, Balian of Ibelin did say that they would destroy the city of Jerusalem if Saladin did not guarantee that that Christians would be respected when they took over the city. He did come to a negotiation, despite the fact that there was an attack on the city. But that is true. We see at the end of the film the foreboding of the Third Crusade, which is, Balian is heading west, back where he came from, back home, and we see the English king, Richard the Lionheart, Plantagenet, coming eastwards then on his crusade, which is the Third Crusade, in which he would pit himself against Saladin as well then. And that would be a battle of the ages as well. So that was pretty interesting. There are a couple of, if you are interested in that sort of Crusade era on screen, there are quite a few older movies which are very pro-Christian, pro sort of Western European centric, from the 30s and the 40s, these really old sort of MGM, Warner Brothers type movies, which are, had the sort of the best looking actor of the day in them, so The Crusades is one of them. But there are some other movies as well which I'd like to recommend as well. So there's a movie called Ironclad, which is more of like a straight to DVD movie, which is okay. I'd give it about 5.5, 6 out of 10. It's not too bad. It's worth watching if you like the Crusades anyways. You've got a Swedish language film called Arn, which tells the story of a Scandinavian prince who goes to fight in the Crusade. I think it's a prince who fights in the Crusade. You've got Lionheart, which is a movie from 1987, which really tells the story of there was what was called the Children's Crusade, where the sort of the religious fervour around doing your crusade and doing your pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This is a true story about quite a number of children who went from west to east. Unfortunately, the real story doesn't end too well, but that film Lionheart from 1987 is based on that as well. But the one I like has recently came out on the History Channel as well. It's a really good series featuring Mark Hamill. It's called Nightfall. And the first series, it is mainly about the Knights Templar, which I mentioned earlier. First series is really showing you the end of the Christian Middle East and the Crusader states, where there's the siege of Acre. Acre was one of the last was the last effective stronghold of the Knights Templar within the Christian states, and it gets taken over by the Muslims, and the Knights Templar have to leave and evacuate. I believe they evacuated to Cyprus first of all, but the series takes place in France, and then it leads up into the second series then with like I mentioned earlier, the eventual corruption, or the so-called corruption, of the Templar Order, and the politicking that went on eventually led to the downfall of the Templars and the requisitioning of their sort of of their web, of their money by the French king and his papal puppet, as well as destroying the military order in Western Europe, from what we understand. So, obviously I love this movie. Believe it or not, there was another Crusade movie which was due to be made back in the 90s, which I would have loved to have seen as well. It's very similar to Kingdom of Heaven, but there was a movie which was touted in the early 90s. I think it was 1992. And it was an Arnold Schwarzenegger style. It was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie vehicle, and it was due to be directed by Paul Verhoeven. Now, this director, he's a Dutch director who did what was the film? Starship Troopers. Sorry, he did Starship Troopers, and unfortunately, all the planning for this film, the film was to be called Crusade, and this film was going to be big budget, and we're talking one of the biggest budgets Hollywood has ever done. The reason it fell through was because the production company Caralco had actually gone bust, and they unfortunately weren't in any position whatsoever to continue with the project. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about what the film would have been, you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger just coming off his Terminator 2 movie, which he was at the top of the Hollywood tree at the time. He would have been playing a German half, not a half. He would be playing a German sort of aristocrat prince, who his half brother, with a claim to their sort of dynastic sort of inheritance, would be both Crusader knights, and this character would have gone from the Christian West to Jerusalem, and would have, similarly to this Kingdom of Heaven, taken in Jerusalem, really seen the Crusades from the Muslim point of view, and then switched sides against his and would have defended what was right, the sort of the middle path, away from the Christian fanatical path, and would have encountered and taken on his half brother, the sort of nemesis of the film. It was due to be a huge film. I would have loved to have seen it. I think you can read the script online if you ever get a chance. I haven't read it yet, but I'd love to have a look at that myself. But any Schwarzenegger vehicle at that time would have been good, but any Crusade film would have been good, is what I'm trying to get at anyways. But yeah, overall, I mean, just to give you my sort of takeaway from the film, then you've got lots of pieces of authenticity in the movie. You've got a lot of sort of Hollywood pizzazz in there as well. Great costuming. It is one of the better sort of Crusade films and Crusade films and TV series out there. I'd probably say, along with Nightfall, would be the best. I'm going to give this overall 3.5 out of 5 stars. I just think that this movie, when it came out, there was a theatrical version and a director's cut version. Now, the theatrical version is about 2 hours and 20, and the director's cut gives you a lot more context as well. And I think that the sort of the detail that they went into for the film is a lot more. You can appreciate it a lot more as well. But I mean, when you look at the sort of the budget that was pumped into the movie, 130 million, and it only made 220 back. It wasn't an awful big return for these big costume dramas. With, you look at the cast as well, a huge amount of money had to be poured into that. The director himself as well was Ridley Scott, probably a little bit disappointed with that. But overall, I mean, I think it's a really enjoyable film, and if you do like the Crusades and you do like this period of history, I would say definitely watch this whenever you can, and watch the longer version when you get 2 seconds to watch it as well. It is really well received still, even now, by viewers. 7.2 out of 10 for IMDb. And like I say, if you do enjoy the topic itself, have a look at some of the books I mentioned in Dan Jones's Crusaders video. There are a lot more Crusader books that I'll be looking at myself. But if you've got any recommendations yourself, definitely give me a comment below. Remember to like and to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you can. I've got a lot more coming on with movie reviews and with book reviews as well. But I really appreciate you listening to this, and let me know what you think.